Welcome to Wild Connection, the podcast. I'm your host, Dr. Jennifer Verdelin. I'm a scientist and author that studies animal behavior. I'm passionate about animals and exploring the complexity of their lives, their intelligence, relationships, families, social connections, and emotions. I also love helping people reconnect with nature to live better lives. This podcast is about you, other animals, and how we're all connected in this wild and crazy thing called life. Hey everybody, welcome back to Wild Connection, the podcast where I explore the relationships between people, animals, and the planet. I'm your host, Dr. Jen. I know it's been a while, but there's been a lot going on. I'm happy to be back, and today's guest is someone whose name is synonymous with great ape conservation, Ian Redmond. You might know him as the field biologist who worked closely with Dian Fossey in Rwanda, or as the voice for gorillas, elephants, and countless species needing champions. From trekking through misty mountains to lobbying in high-level policy meetings, Ian has spent decades bridging the world of science and advocacy. In this episode, we talk about his early days with Dian Fossey, the intelligence and lives of gorillas, and why conservation is ultimately about connection. Connection between humans and wildlife, but also between each of us and the world we belong to. So grab your headphones and get ready for a conversation that will inspire you to care more deeply and act more boldly. And before I forget, it is Father's Day, and I want to give a shout out to all the great dads out there, including the love of my life, Mariah, who is the subject of part of this podcast. Happy Father's Day. Hey everybody, welcome back to Wild Connection, the podcast. I am beyond excited today because, I'm now studying mountain gorillas in Uganda, and I am interviewing today with wildlife biologist Ian Redmond, who also has studied these magnificent great apes and worked to conserve not only mountain gorillas, but all the great apes and elephants. So welcome to the show, Ian.
Thank you. And I suppose while we're welcoming, we're also going to put this podcast on Ecoflix, the world's only non-profit streaming platform TV channel dedicated to animals and the planet. So for Ecoflix viewers, welcome to Jennifer Verdelin, and we're going to ask each other questions. It's a podcast with a difference.
Yes, exactly. And so I am just really excited because having just started studying mountain gorillas in the past 2 years, talking to someone who has such a deep history with the work that's been done by you, by others, not only in terms of conservation, but even research. So would it be okay to get a little bit of an intro about how you got involved in conservation of great apes? Even if we're going all the way back, what motivated you to go in this direction?
Well, yes, it is a timely question because a few days ago, I hiked up to Old Karisoki, the site of Dian Fossey's first tent and then cabin and then cluster of cabins. And that work began for Dian in 1967. September the 24th. And that's why now September the 24th is celebrated as World Gorilla Day to mark the occasion that Dian started the Karisoki Research Center. Of course, Dian had actually started on the Congo side in January of that same year, 1967. But because of the Congo Civil War, had to leave and set up shop in Rwanda, just a mile from the border, which might, in some people's eyes, seem unwise. And given the events of the past few decades of genocide and civil war on both sides of the border, it's a turbulent part of the world. But it's where mountain gorillas live. And happily, there are no mountain gorillas in captivity. So their future on this planet depends on the three countries working together to protect this shared patch of forest on the Virunga Mountains. And it's always a delight to go back there. I went back with a French author who's researching a book she's working on, and we hiked up to Karasoke. And of course, she and the other people who joined the group wanted to hear stories of Karasoke. And it's very moving to go back to a place where you spent, I guess, your formative years as a professional. I graduated in 76, so Dian had already been there for nearly 10 years. And she took me on as her research assistant. And I was there during some wonderful times, but also some very traumatic times. It was me who discovered Digit's body. So if there's a single point in my life which pushed me from being primarily research with an interest in conservation to focusing on conservation with maintaining an interest in research, it was the death of Digit, because I'd known him for a little over a year when he was killed. And maybe because he was a young silverback on the edge of his family group, probably would go off on his own in the world, acquire some females, have babies. But as a peripheral male, his role in guerrilla society is to watch out for danger and tackle an enemy, allowing the group to flee. And it was in that service to his family that Digit died. If he was a human, we'd give him a medal posthumously. In the end, Dian buried his body outside her cabin in a little glade. And then 8 years to the day after Digit was killed, Dian was buried next to him, and next to some other poacher victims. Before Digit, Dian used to send the specimens of gorillas she found, skulls, bones in the forest, or individuals who were killed by poachers, and she recovered their skeletons. She prepared them, sent them to the Smithsonian in Washington. But Digit's death obviously hit her hard, and his skull had been taken, his hands had been taken, so it was a badly mutilated, incomplete skeleton, and for emotional reasons, she buried him there. So yes, revisiting that site is very emotional for me, because that was a turning point in Dian's life. She continued to collect the long-term records of camp, and her co-workers, assistants, and other researchers continue to do that to this day. The director of Karasoke is now a Rwandan, Felix Ndagijimana, which would thrill Dian, that there are now senior scientists in Rwanda and Congo and Uganda who are playing that role of leading the research and the conservation. So, yeah, a whole turbulent head full of emotions and memories, some wonderful and some not so wonderful. But just let me finish that day, because I was with this French author who had seen Gorillas in the Mist as a 10-year-old. She was far too young to be watching a film of that nature, and had been obsessed with the story ever since. And now she's writing a book that she wants to dedicate to Dian. So for her to visit Dian's grave was very moving. And she's of limited resources, so she couldn't afford a Rwandan gorilla watching permit, which is $1,500 for 1 hour with the gorillas. But as we walked down from Old Karasoke on the Porter Trail, which for decades had lines of porters twice a week carrying goods and supplies on their head, like a 19th century expedition, up to camp. No radio. Our only communication with the outside world was letters, which we would send in the porter's pocket. They'd take to the post office and pick up any letters coming in and bring them up to camp. So that Porter's Trail is now the trail up to Dian's grave. And as you walk down the Porter's Trail, quietly, bees buzzing, sunny day, just beautiful. A group of gorillas had just crossed the trail, and they were feeding just in the vegetation. So we didn't have a gorilla visit, but Yasmina saw her first wild gorilla, blackback, feeding in the vegetation, just peeping over towards us. And it was a magical moment. So yes, moments of great joy right up to this day, and moments of great trauma going back 40-something years.
It
was a long answer to a short question. We're going to have to do better for this.
It's beautiful, and coming full circle in that way, from where you started to where you see things now. I can't imagine all of the complexity of how it feels. I've only been I'm in windy, impenetrable forest, just down the road from, I guess Mogahinga would be bordering Rwanda, and in that area. So I'm a little bit further, just a touch further away, in windy impenetrable forest. And I've gotten to know these individuals. I follow 4 families, and I've often thought how, as scientists, right, we're always told, don't anthropomorphize, but I've always zoomorphized people, not anthropomorphized animals, because we are animals. And I often look for ways to remind us that we are, in fact, animals, and that we have more in common with other species than we have differences.
It's a great privilege to work with any of the great apes, or indeed any of the large-brained social mammals.
Yes.
So whales and dolphins and elephants and other species that have a cognitive capacity for self-awareness and understanding their role in their society. And I think that's just one of the most fascinating fields of research. Increasingly now we're recognizing these species have culture.
Of course.
Information and knowledge which is passed down from generation to generation and differs from region to region. So the windy gorillas are fascinating because they're more arboreal than the mountain gorillas of the Virungas, because there are more fruit trees growing at that lower altitude.
Yeah, and terrifyingly arboreal, I have to add. You're like watching a 400+ pound silverback up, 30, 40 meters high. Yeah. For me, I'm always just like, oh, I can't look. I have to look. I'm doing research, but there's a part of me that's terrified for them.
And one silverback is known to have fallen from a tree and unlucky hit a rock, because the leaf litter is so deep that had he not been unlucky, he would probably have just bounced and been hurt, not died.
Well, there was a female that also died, and they don't survive generally when they fall from 30, 40 meters. No, definitely not. And they do fall. And that's, there's a lot of feeding competition within families, as I'm sure you know. And so sometimes and in this case, that's what was suspected, is that there was some dispute over fruit in the tree, and female fell, and unfortunately she was pregnant as well. So they're very arboreal and high, very high. And so I haven't been to where the Virungas and the Rwanda side, but I'm curious, are there very, very tall trees there as well?
Not so many, because you're above the bamboo zone. Mm-hmm. The 2 main tree species, Hagania and Hypericum, gorillas climb them to harvest the epiphytic ferns.
Yes.
And, you see them lolling on these big mossy cushions, reaching around and grabbing handfuls of ferns to eat. But there is a fruit tree that grows on the steep ridges of the volcanoes called Pygeum africana, the African cherry or African plum, Prunus africana, although it's got a new name now. The botanists keep changing these things. I can't keep up. But it is a fruit that produces sort of a seed that size that has a stone inside, not much smaller. So gorillas are a seed dispersal agent for that tree, as indeed are the Ruwenzori turacos. They must quite a large fruit to get into a turaco, but the gorillas eat them and they love them. And I remember one day, it's actually my birthday, being with a whole family in the top of one of these Pygeum trees that was fruiting over a ravine. So it's not just the height of the tree, but the deep ravine. And Ruwenzori turacos were calling, that dramatic descending gargle, and the flash of red wing feathers when they soar between branches. They're going to run like a squirrel along a branch and then take flight. And the gorillas clambering around in the canopy, and it was just one of the most memorable birthdays I've ever had. But the fear of one of them putting a foot wrong or grabbing a branch, I mean, they're careful. They test branches before they put their weight on them. But if they misjudge it, then there's what a biologist would call a strong selective pressure not to misjudge, because if you're cautious, you'd probably die. But let me, before we get too far into the weeds of arboreal behavior, How did you come to be in Windy?
Oh gosh. Well, I'm going to give you the long answer too. So, when I was about 18, I watched a documentary on, it was put out by the John Aspinall Foundation, had a man called Michael Atwater who ran a gorilla orphanage.
Mark.
Oh, Mark Atwater. Okay.
Yes,
Thank you.
He's a good friend.
Oh my gosh. Okay. This is exciting because, I was 18. I watched this documentary and he was running the orphanage in Brazzaville, Congo. And Nat Geo did a documentary, and I watched that and I said, I'm going to do that. So I called National Geographic because, there wasn't email in those days, and they gave me Mark's number in the Congo. And I called him. So it would be very interesting if he remembers the very young American girl who called him and said, I'd like to come volunteer there. And he was really polite and said, well, why don't you write me a letter and let me know kind of what you can offer. So I wrote my heartfelt letter and I got a brochure back about the work that they were doing. And then I ended up volunteering at the Center for Great Apes, which you probably have heard of Patty Reagan and the Center for Great Apes.
I visited once many years ago.
Yes. And so they're currently in Wauchula, Florida. And she started that to provide a sanctuary for chimps and orangutans from the entertainment industry, ex-pets, and has done some incredible work. I go visit still to this day some of those young chimps and orangutans that I knew who are now very old adults. And so I was a bit obsessed for many, many years. And then, I got my PhD in ecology and evolution, studied brown capuchin monkeys in Argentina with my PhD advisor, but settled a lot on prairie dogs for a very long time. And then did some work on lemurs and kind of gave up on the mountain gorilla, dream. And I read all the books and Mark and Delia Owens' books on Cry of the Elephant or Cry of the Kalahari and Eye of the Elephant, which were all kind of, motivational for me.
And Africa was still calling to you.
Oh, for sure. Yes. I mean, I thought I'd let it go, but I didn't. And so in 2021, I wrote a Fulbright proposal. And so I went to Windy Impenetrable Forest on a Fulbright. And that Fulbright, it was a project designed to collaboratively develop online course modules under profit sharing. Because as you know, in your work, many times researchers and others go to these areas. They take local knowledge or use local knowledge to advance research or other programs, and there's no real compensation. And so as a professor, I might go, I get all of this information, I develop a course, and then universities make a pile of money. And so what I wanted to do was create a system where we offer course modules, students take them like case studies, that money goes back to the community that helped develop the content that I put together in those modules. So that's how I ended up in Windy. And one of the modules has to do with mountain gorillas and human wildlife conflict. And I was given permission to go with the trackers, not to study mountain gorillas, just to go with the trackers and learn what they're doing and how they do it. And every now and then I'd see a gorilla just over there, like a black bean in a salad bowl. And after spending some 6 months there, I developed some relationships with various park officials and had conversations about what are the things they were concerned about in terms of conservation, ecology, behavior, the future of those Bwindi mountain gorillas, which there's about over half of the population lives in Bwindi. And so I made a proposal and I received a research permit, and then I got my first grant, and here we are. And if I can manage to never leave, this would be very okay.
But right now you're speaking to me from the US?
Yes, I'm in the US. I'm heading back actually next week because I'm also doing some education works, science, technology, engineering, art, mathematics, a STEAM project funded by the US Embassy, Kampala. Because one of the things I noticed was plastic is a really big problem in Uganda. Now, not so much in Rwanda, but in Uganda, they produce over 600 tons of plastic waste per day. And in the rural communities surrounding Bwindi and other areas of conservation concern, the plastic is literally choking even the waterways, the wild, and I suspect the wildlife. So I proposed a project to teach, the scientific method, scientific process, as well as create a communication message about plastic. I'm working with 3 high schools, 2 in Bwindi, 1 in Queen Elizabeth National Park, just next door, and that's focusing on elephants. And the students we did some investigations and how do we look for microplastics. We collected plastic, categorized it, weighed it. Now they're working on their projects to present to a panel at the end of the year in celebration of the project. So it's a really exciting project. I'm hoping we'll get more funding to build some bicycle-powered shredders so that each school can shred plastic, and we're making products out of that plastic. So I've got a panini press and ovens, and 2 UK brothers make their YouTube channel was very instrumental in helping me learn how to make some simple products and teach the students how to do that and provide the supplies. So it's exciting. And so I'm kind of right now doing 2 things, the mountain gorilla research, and then on the other side, the education and science literacy, really, to empower these young people who are coming out of their senior levels and into A levels to become maybe passionate scientists themselves.
That would be wonderful, wouldn't it?
Yes.
Yes, you mentioned bicycle power. Did you come across the pedal-powered cinema?
No, I have not.
No.
Okay.
That's been active around Bwindi for, quite a lot of years, but it's now so old, and it's based on CDs rather than now you use a hard drive or a stick with the films. But the power is generated by the children to watch films. And for many of the communities around Bwindi, they're off-grid. So these are children who have not seen moving images before.
Yes.
And a very dynamic filmmaker called Madeline Westwood and I set up the Great Ape Film Initiative, GAFFI.
Okay.
So if you look up GAFFI for number Apes, you'll find, or actually if you go to YouTube and search for the bike that helps save gorillas, Madeline made a really nice little promo, which is now somewhat out of date, but it is an example of how the simple technology, that powers a generator that can project onto a screen, can transform people's understanding.
Yes.
So a bicycle that can convert plastic waste into something useful, fantastic. Of course, we have to turn off the tap of plastic waste and get companies to stop using it.
Absolutely.
And Rwanda has been very strong in that, although there's still a lot of plastic bottles in Rwanda, but plastic bags illegal. And it's gradually happening. I heard recently from colleagues in the Congo, in the Democratic Republic of Congo, that a lot of the people that work in the mines drink a lot of juice. That there is no culture of being tidy and putting it in a recycling bin. So that has to be introduced, because there too, plastic is in the forest and it breaks down, or it gets chewed, or it's just an eyesore. And animals will chew it, especially if there's a few drops of juice in it and they find that it's sweet, and they'll end up ingesting the plastic.
That's right. And,
Yeah.
and it's also the impact to, humans, right? Where every week we're getting a new news article about where they're finding microplastics in the next part of our bodies. And I think that what I'm really trying to do on that front is, yes, there's a behavior component, but there's a huge infrastructure challenge. And I was in consultation for many meetings with the, Coca-Cola, and they had the campaign, right, to get a Coke in everybody's hand within 30 seconds, or anywhere in the world. And I think it should be, within 30 seconds, we should have a place for that plastic to be put, but nobody picks it up. And these communities, as you know, are so far from big cities that it's very expensive to transport. And so
it's a one-way trip for the plastic to wherever it goes in the world, almost everywhere.
Exactly.
And when traditionally people who live in villages in or near forests, they'll be eating off banana leaves as a plate. And of course, you drop it because it's just biodegradable. It goes out into the leaf litter. So I think that culturally, you eat and you discard the bits. And when you're working in your fields or walking through the forest, it doesn't matter if your container is something you've made yourself or your family have made out of leaves and stems. But now that we've introduced the forever container.
But once they know, I will say this, once the students, once they knew, and I had them do a plastic self-audit. So how much plastic do you use? Where do you put it? Do you put it in a bin? Do you put it on the ground? No judgment, just where do you put it? And so I collected that information. And I will say that once they knew, their school grounds are now clean. They pick it up, they have bags. And then we worked out where can they take it to go, at least so that in theory it's taken.
The temptation is to burn it. And that, of course, this is toxic.
But I taught them that, and they were shocked. They didn't know. And so this is where it's been really great, because giving them that bit of information, then they're like, but then what do we do? Then they wanted, what's the solution? And that's where I feel it's always important. And I don't know, in the work that you've done, you've worked a lot on elephants as well, and elephant conservation. And there's a ton of human wildlife conflict around elephants, even around gorillas. And so, how have you navigated, informing versus solutions, right? I feel like we always need to provide solutions. So what are some of the challenges that you have found when you're trying to work with local communities about solving some of their very real problems that they have with wildlife?
Well, very often the solution is a fence or some form of barrier to prevent animals from coming out of their habitat. But as for mountain gorillas, that might be a solution, because they only live in national parks. There are no mountain gorillas living outside. Eastern lowland gorillas, a lot of them live in community forests. So the solution there is to inform people as to how to avoid confrontation that leads to either party being hurt.
Sure.
And that's happening in Kenya too. The Born Free Foundation is running workshops to teach members of the community, and in particular children who might have to walk some distance to school and might meet elephants, just the basics of elephant behavior. What to do if an elephant is startled by you, how can you defuse that situation so that neither party feels so threatened? And a little bit of knowledge can help there. So Born Free had some sort of large elephant puppets made out of old cloth and bamboo frames and things. But so it's entertaining. It's like pantomime, but you're teaching elephant behavior and what would be an appropriate human behavior to defuse a panic. You just want to avoid panic, whether it's panic on the human's behalf or panic on the animal's behalf, gorilla or elephant. If they're frightened, well, the first thought is to run away.
Yeah.
But sometimes you find yourself so close that that fight or flight distance, you're into the fight zone. And you want to very quickly calm things down so that nobody feels the need to attack. And that I mean, it can be done. And oddly enough, it's probably easier with gorillas in that part of Africa because the local languages of Rwanda and southwest Uganda don't categorize gorillas in the category of wildlife. So wild animals are Inyamaswa. And then there's people, and then there's Ngagi. Ngagi are not Inyamaswa. They're recognized as being almost like cousins in the forest.
Right.
And that cultural respect for great apes. People in Rwanda and Uganda don't eat gorilla meat.
No.
It's more complicated further west in Congo. There's a tribal belief that eating gorilla meat gives you some of the power and strength of the gorilla. So big men like to eat gorilla meat because they feel it makes them bigger and stronger. And if a chief in one village is hosting neighboring chiefs and doesn't serve them gorilla meat, it's like he's disrespecting them. So we're going to have to work to change those traditions, but where there's some respect for gorillas, and in a strange way, that is a form of respect. You respect their size and strength, and you want to assimilate it in a very direct way. But in Rwanda and Uganda, fortunate for their ape neighbors, there is no tradition of eating chimpanzees or gorillas to assimilate their intelligence or their strength or their other properties. And you can work on that. And certainly the pedal powered cinemas have very successfully done that for those villages and communities that have seen them. Because there, when it's usually in the church or the church hall, the biggest building there isn't a proper blackout. So there's bits of cardboard and curtains and things hung up to try and make it dark. But there are always cracks. And through the cracks are people who are hearing the sound of video commentary and peeping through the cracks. And then there's people looking over their shoulder. So you get a line of people all trying to glimpse through the crack in the curtain the moving pictures, because moving pictures are such a novelty. Gillian Miller, the director of the Gorilla organization that organized this pedal power cinema program with Gaffy, said she was standing at the back once with one of the mothers of the children who was watching a video of a female gorilla feeding her baby. And of course, it's the same holding the heavy head in the crook of the arm, holding it to the breast and tending to it as it feeds. And she was Gillian described her as being astonished and saying that when she gets home, she's going to talk to her husband to make sure that if he does go into the forest, which of course he shouldn't if he's setting snares, he stops setting snares because they could catch the gorilla babies, and that there's an immediate recognition of common behavior. So as you say, it's not that we're anthropomorphizing gorillas, we're recognizing that they are our cousins and we have many behavior patterns that we share from our common ancestor.
Yeah.
But that's a lot to get into a conversation, but an image like that, particularly a moving image, just does it. You don't have to explain it. It's self-evident. My most viewed video on my YouTube channel is called Gorilla Mums.
Yeah.
It's literally 2.5 minutes of natural maternal behavior in gorillas in a sanctuary in Cameroon.
Right.
So not the one in Congo Brazzaville, which you aspire to go to, but one a bit further north in Limbe.
Okay.
And two females, and obviously being a sanctuary, they normally keep the females on contraception. And they'd have two failures. It happens sometimes. The contraceptive doesn't work and a baby's born. And there were two babies born to mothers, one of whom I'd actually helped to rescue with the help of a Nigerian minister who had them confiscated from Kano and returned to Cameroon. And they'd grown up in the sanctuary together. They were clearly close friends. Watch it. I think in that 2.5 minutes, you get more insight into gorilla behavior, communication skills, maternal skills, then 30 million plus people have watched it, but the average viewing time is 1 minute 15 seconds. I think, oh, come on, you can't hold your attention for the whole 2.5 minutes.
I know, right? well, it's so interesting because I'm sensing there might be some differences on the Rwanda side and in Bwindi. So the Uganda side next to Rwanda would be Mogahinga, but in Bwindi, the gorillas come out of the forest and into the communities quite often, and there are conflicts.
Which of their crops do they damage or eat?
So two primary. So eucalyptus wouldn't be a crop, right? But they do like eucalyptus bark quite a lot. And eucalyptus.
Isn't that amazing? A species introduced from Australia, and both the Virunga gorillas and the Bwindi gorillas have learned that the sap tastes good.
Yes.
And probably the reason for that is that it's rich in sodium. So it becomes a kind of a living salt lick.
Yeah. They basically, they come around to them, not every day, but there'll be times where they're there for 2 or 3 days, really enjoying the bark. And they get a little relaxed is the only word I know how to use after spending some good time eating eucalyptus bark. But the biggest challenge is the bananas. And people, like just the average person might think, oh, they love bananas, but they're not eating the fruit. They rip open the trunk of it, which, I mean, it's not a tree, right? Bananas aren't trees, but they rip it open and they take the inner part, which is like full of water.
Technically known as taking the pith.
Taking the pith, but it's juicy.
You don't see it that very carefully.
Yeah. And they enjoy it very, very much. Yeah. And they can annihilate, most people on the edge of the parks, they have small plots of land that might have 20 or 30 banana plants, and they can annihilate it in 10 minutes, depending on the size of the group.
Presumably, Uganda Wildlife Authority has a compensation scheme if they can demonstrate that it's definitely wildlife.
Sure. And there's community conservation officers, and there's individuals that are trained within the communities to encourage the gorillas to go. But, there have been stories of one particular family. They'll get up at 3 a.m. and leave their nest and go to somebody's property to take the bananas. And
are the farmers not open to help in switching to crops that gorillas are not interested in?
So they've tried that even in buffer zones with tea, right? So that there's nothing useful for gorillas, but I have seen the gorillas cross the entire tea plantation to go to the bananas that are just on the other side, right? And it's quite a big distance. And then and as you know, when gorillas want to move, they move fast. I'm built for comfort, not speed. So I sometimes struggle to keep up when they are moving, seriously moving. And I've seen them, essentially almost run through a tea plantation to get to the bananas. And there's been some challenges with what is a good buffer zone, right? And then you also have leaching of pesticides from that they might use on these plantations into the edges of the forest, and there might be some consequences there. So this is that struggle, and I think people also feel this way about elephants. I'm not sure, but how could anybody not like elephants, and how could anybody not like gorillas? Well,
if they're destroying your livelihood, that's
exactly it. And so there might be compensation. Sure. Okay. I mean, there was a gorilla family that annihilated 13 plants in less than 15 minutes. And the person might only have 25. And so now, is the compensation going to be enough for however long it takes to then replant, regrow? You've lost the entire crop for that, year, essentially. And so it sometimes leads to conflict, even though generally people are glad that there are gorillas because of the tourism. And that's something that I think you've seen grow and evolve so much from, from when you started to now. What is your feeling about ecotourism when it comes to lots of wildlife, but particularly the great apes? What is your point of view or perspective about what you've seen and how you've seen it develop and the impact it's had?
Well, I think it's been very impressive how it's developed with the welfare of the apes uppermost in the minds of the rule makers and decision makers. So the gorilla rules that were established in 1979-80 by Bill Weber and Amy Vedder, who sort of took the Karasoke method of habituation, as they worked up at Karasoke with Dian and with me, and applied it to other groups, not the research groups, so that there wasn't this constant hassle of people saying, "Oh, take me to see the gorillas," and there were no tourist groups. So that began and was immediately successful. And they instituted the concept of a small group of visitors paying a relatively large amount for 1 hour once a day.
Mm-hmm.
And that, apart from hiking it from 6 to 8 people, has stuck.
Yeah.
So I know that it introduces an element of risk of transmission of respiratory viruses and potentially gastrointestinal parasites or pathogens. But the evidence is that the groups that are habituated have more kids and better survival of those children, sort of lower infant mortality, than the gorillas that are wild and just flee from people. And that's partly because when they're habituated for tourism, every group of tourists has guards with them, so it acts as an anti-poach patrol. So the poachers don't set snares near them, so fewer gorillas get caught in snares. And B, what was B going to be?
I don't know.
The protection of the gorillas. Obviously the jobs it creates are amazing. Thousands of people now get a living in some way connected to gorilla tourism. But the other reason that I was coming to is that if they do get caught in a snare, the gorilla doctors, the team of vets that intervene and remove snares, can do so. But in a wild group, you can't get near them.
Yeah.
To dart a mother to get a snare off an infant or intervene in any other medical way.
Sure.
So the benefits of habituation are not just that it brings in revenue to support the conservation of the park, and that benefits the surrounding community, not just economically, because of the jobs and the trickle-down effect. And anyone who can craft something can sell crafts to tourists. Anyone who can sing and dance can perform for tourists. Anyone who wants to just be proud of their culture, and show people around. And cultural tourism is as important, particularly in Uganda and Rwanda, as the actual gorilla tourism. People go there because they want to see gorillas, and then they realize, whoa,
exactly,
the culture of these people is beautiful.
Yeah.
So that's really, really positive. But what it also does is it maintains the gorillas as gardeners of those forests. So there is regeneration of trees because there's someone sowing the seeds, having chewed and scarified them so that they do actually germinate. And there's light gaps being created, so there's an active ecology. Yes. And that benefits the people who farm nearby because the water that flows out of the forest continues to flow during the drier seasons, because the forest is a big enough sponge that it holds water and keeps some streams flowing year-round. And there used to be more, but there's less forest and there's less rain now.
Yes,
and
I know.
Climate change kicks in. We're seeing changes, and that's worrying. But what the tourism has done is to maintain the integrity of those ecosystems. And yes, I know that there are risks through disease transmission. Since COVID, almost everyone in the world has understood the concept of reducing transmission through droplet infection. So wearing a mask is more accepted. It used to be some places did, some places didn't. Now everyone's asked to wear a mask for their 1 hour with the gorillas. And they understand the concept of social distancing.
Yeah.
So when you say you're trying to maintain, it used to be 7 meters, now it's 10 meters, but the gorillas don't respect the 10 meters. So you're constantly trying to maneuver the
Yeah.
people so they get a proper look at the gorillas and take the photographs and experience the wonder that you and I have had the good fortune to experience repeatedly. It's their 1 hour. You want it to be special for them, but you
Sure.
want the gorillas to be safe, and you don't want them to do anything that was going to alarm the gorillas, because the gorillas would just leave. It's a free forest. They can be where they want. It's a very challenging coordination between two species, one of which could take it or leave it, whether the humans are there, but aren't normally bothered.
Yeah.
And the other, which desperately wants to see the gorillas, so clearing vegetation gently and getting into a position where you can watch. And at the end of the hour, you hope that everyone's satisfied. The gorillas have finished their nap, or they've finished eating, or whatever they were doing, and the humans have had that glimpse
Right.
of gorilla family life that they'll carry with them in their heads and probably in their video cameras and phone cameras for the rest of their lives.
Yeah. Well, and you're right. And I think it's a delicate balance, but, in Uganda, everybody's required to wear a mask. It's not like you're asked, you required. You cannot see gorillas without a mask. But it's so funny what you say about, the gorillas, they kind of don't mind. Most of them don't mind. But there's one, I don't know if you've ever visited Mubare Group in Buhoma, in Bwindi, but Mariah, they call him the timekeeper. And it's funny because he'll give you in 55 minutes. That's it. And almost as if he has a watch, you see him at around 54 minutes starting to look around and decide, okay, where are we going? I'm done with this. And usually at 55 minutes, he takes his family and goes. And it's hilarious. Like I've seen it enough over 2 years, and I'm like, I can tell when he's starting to be like, okay, all right, we're done. It's time to go. But he's also like, I would say, there's sometimes where it feels really intentional that he brings his family into the open. Like, I'm going to give you the best view of everybody, but only for 55 minutes. And then I'm going, and as it's really, and all the trackers, know him very well. They're like, oh, Mariah, he's the timekeeper. He only gives you 55 minutes. And it's almost always true. It's really fascinating. Whereas other silverbacks or other groups, they're not, whether you're there or not, they're going to keep doing whatever they're doing. But he's one where it feels really intentional, how you're seeing the family and for how long. It's really interesting. So it's true. And I see all of that. I see tourists all the time. They find the strange white woman that's walking out of the vegetation with the trackers. And I've seen the joy that they have and the respect that most tourists have for where they are, what they're doing, and what they're seeing and what they're having the opportunity. And I believe that tourism has saved not just gorillas, but many of the communities around the park and elevated them and given opportunities that wouldn't otherwise be there. And I know the first time I was in the field with the gorilla doctors, gosh, that was like, I was trying not to have, gush too much. Like, oh my God, Dr. Ricky, Dr. Fred. I was trying to be a professional. But, the work that they do is unbelievable. And really that all the trackers and the rangers, I learned very, very quickly that I could be there for 10 years studying, but they hold some really significant knowledge about these gorillas.
And your earlier point about translating that knowledge into what scientists regard as verified, but giving credit to the people who actually made the observations or know stuff. Last week I was in Bonn at the Convention on Migratory Species, and one of the topics under discussion for the Scientific Council meeting was the use of an assimilation of indigenous and local knowledge, and if it's knowledge that can be verified, it's really important and that the origin of that knowledge is respected in either the papers or the reports or the interviews that are given. But of course, there are also beliefs which, as far as some indigenous people are concerned, are the same as knowledge, which can be very damaging to conservation. If you believe that gorilla meat is going to give you the power of a gorilla.
Oh, yes.
Or if you believe that some product has a property, medicinal or magical, then that can be a challenge for conservation. Absolutely. But in terms of actual, the people who live in the forest are often the best naturalists.
Yes.
And I regard myself as a naturalist first, by birth, a biologist by training, and a conservationist by necessity. Yeah. So I wouldn't choose to be a conservationist, but when people are killing the animals that you're studying, you need to do something about it.
Yeah.
And one of the projects that I guess I'm most proud of, as I'm chairman of the Gorilla Organisation, which is the UK derivation of the Digit Fund, which Dian.
Yeah, nice.
And his Digit behind me, a portrait of Digit by the English artist Frank Lomas.
Yeah.
And before he was killed, he would sometimes come and sit and look over my shoulder. So it amuses me that he's still kind of looking over my shoulder.
Right, sure.
But I got off on such a tangent, I forgot where I started.
No, you were talking about how you manage the Digit Fund in the UK.
Right. So well, I don't manage, but I chair the trustees.
Yes.
One of our projects in conjunction with Uganda Wildlife Authority was to invite poachers in a community of poachers to publicly renounce their poaching. So stand up and hand over their spears, their traps, and so on. And we would hire an agronomist, a Ugandan lady who has, Regina, she has taught them how to grow vegetables using organic methods. So no pesticides,
right?
But bigger, better cabbages and potatoes than the others in the area.
Yeah.
And these men are now, that there is a Reformed Poachers Association. I'm Facebook friends with the chairman of that association. I go and see them occasionally. We'll probably go next in November. If you're there, we'll probably.
I will be there.
So some of the trustees want to see the projects on the ground.
Yes.
And these men that learned their trade of setting snares and hunting in the forest are now teaching their sons to grow organic vegetables. They have a better income. They're respected members of their community. They're not going to get arrested or locked up, which might happen if they're in the forest doing things illegally.
Yeah.
So it's transformed their lives. And what happens to the vegetables? Well, they're sold at market, and a lot of them end up in the lodges to feed the tourists.
That's right.
So imagine you're sitting down to your lovely salad or meat and veg or whatever you're eating, and the vegetables are grown by someone who previously thought that the only way they could make a living is to go in the forest and set snares. And the rangers who patrol those parts of the forest now say the snares are down to almost nothing.
Yeah.
So that's saving gorillas, saving antelope, saving bush pig, and improving the quality of life of that community. And now that's something that needs to be replicated wherever we can set up such a project.
Yeah, absolutely.
Often these people don't have land because they were evicted from the forest when the national park was created, and they've never been properly compensated for that. So you're trying to rectify historic wrongs, give people, whether they're Batwa or other tribe, a better way of life in the modern world so that they can develop, their kids are going to school. And the Gorilla Organization has educated a lot of the young people from Batwa communities. Yeah. And some of their taller neighbors used to snort derisively at the idea of teaching Batwa in schools. And how wonderful that some of them just excel because they're as bright as anybody else.
Of course. There
are some very positive things coming out of this whole mix of tourism and development and conservation.
Well, and that's where, like, circling back to the plastics project, you know, I even envision that we can make bricks, you can build houses. There's so many things, and trying to create alternative livelihoods for.
If plastic bottles are still intact, you can make walls with them.
Well, but it's much better to actually shred them and compress them, and that brick is a brick like to build a house,
Yes.
not just with. I've seen lots of structures with the bottles, and they're great, but really to construction grade. Bricks can be made from plastic bottles, and so I'm wanting to help individuals see that you can create beautiful things that are products that people will buy. Whether it's construction tiles, whether it's coasters, whether it's jewelry, whether it's functional things like bricks, and I work with a company in Uganda called Takataka Plastics. It's in Gulu. Gulu was just named the cleanest city in Uganda because of their work. And they have transformed that city. And they were so generous in bringing examples of the products that they're making, even tablets in school where you can write on the tablets, you can practice your writing with the alphabet. So these kinds of things, it takes about 20 bottles to make one tablet. And so you can make park benches, there's so many things that can be done at a high level if there's just a certain number of tools that are made available and some education. But I would say, looking at Digit behind you, Mariah is my Digit, I would say. And I've often, worried about him and if he's okay. And if he was, sometimes I get, some updates like, oh, we're worried Mariah hasn't, he doesn't seem to be feeling well. And I'm like, oh no, because there's a higher incidence happening of certain, what they're not sure of, but maybe parasitic infection that's causing, the death of multiple individuals just even in the last year. And so that's one of the pieces that I'm looking at in my research is what drives differences in individual levels of parasitic infection within a family, right? So if we're all living together and we're all moving together, why do some individuals have certain, diversity?
That's the mystery of host resistance, which is
well, there's some genetic possibilities, and that's one of the things that we're doing is sequencing some genes that might be involved in modulating parasitic infection and might be able to give some insight, as well as thinking about diet and all kinds of other things. So I have a sample of a pilot study of 28 gorillas, and we've gotten some preliminary data back. So very excited about that and combining it with the behavior. But, as I get to know individuals more and I think about your time with those gorillas and all the work that you've done, like you said, it's been traumatic and it's not always positive. And you've done some incredible work, even undercover work, and put yourself at risk in trying to protect different species, not just gorillas, but other species as well. How do you deal with the emotional toll sometimes that comes with caring so much? So continuing to care, continuing to tirelessly work. How do you process the emotional side of some of the things that you've seen? I mean, and we're seeing that on a large scale. It's called the eco grief or ecological grief that many people are having as we continue to lose species. There's hopeful stories, and then there's still really, really traumatic, sad situations that are happening. How do you deal with that and stay so positive?
I guess I'd describe myself as determinedly optimistic. We have to succeed on this. Failure is not an option, and therefore seize every opportunity to move things in the right direction, which is not necessarily a national park that is defended against all comers, but more moderating our behavior so that we are compatible with the ecosystem functioning.
Right.
wherever we live.
Yeah.
And for many of us, if we live in a city, there's not much of the original ecosystem left.
Yeah.
But as we face the multiple threats of biodiversity loss and climate change and pollution, all of which are interconnected, you kind of have to think of, well, how do we make each square yard or square meter of the planet's surface thrive, be healthy?
Mm-hmm.
And that might mean taking up concrete or tarmac if it's not absolutely necessary, or replacing it perhaps with a cement grid, which you can drive over but has soak away properties and green. We're faced with flash floods because of these extreme weather events. And earlier today, outside my window, it's like raining stair rods.
Yeah.
And our drainage systems were not really designed for repeated that. And the ground is already sodden. Where's it going to go? When the ground is covered in impervious tarmac or concrete or steel, it's going to flow off. And one of the things I was just alluding to earlier was the ecosystem services provided by the gorilla's habitat. And those have not hitherto been valued economically.
Yeah.
So we think of gorillas as bringing in money because people pay to see them.
Sure.
So that's like their ornamental value.
Yeah.
Gorillas are beautiful. They're fascinating. We'll pay to come see them. But if there's a pandemic or a civil war or a terrorist atrocity, tourists stop coming.
Yes.
Then who pays the wages? So my current, one of my major interests at the moment is what's been termed natural capital.
Yes.
That is an economic value to living nature, inspired in particular by the work of Ralph Sharmy, who I'm surprised to get to know while he was assistant director at the International Monetary Fund. You don't think that a guy who hangs out with gorillas and elephants will be talking to the second in command at the IMF. But Ralph has calculated the economic value of services provided by whales in the oceans, in sequestering and storing carbon and replenishing or encouraging fish stocks to boom because of the fertilizing they do with their fecal plumes. And in the forest, it's the herbivores, the apes and the elephants in particular, that are turning soft, sort of low carbon leaves into fertilizer, which big old trees can then benefit from.
Right.
So they're doing the same. Hashtag gardeners of the forest.
Okay.
If you think of a gorilla as a gardener, what do you do as a gardener? If you're growing vegetables, you lop branches so that they're not shaded by the nearby tree. You pull out any plants you don't want that we call weeds, but there's wildflowers that are blinded there by wind or animal dispersal, because they compete for nutrients with your vegetables.
Right.
And what do you do with those weeds? You put them on a compost heap, and when they've rotted down, you put those nutrients back in the soil. What do elephants and gorillas do? They eat plants, digest part of it. The rest comes out in their droppings. And elephant dung and gorilla dung is substantial, particularly elephant dung. They keep open the pathway through the forest, create light gaps by pushing over trees, or in the case of gorillas, building nests in trees, but also on the ground. They like to nest in the little salad bowl glades where there's lots of herbaceous plants, and that's where they leave their dung, which, if they were eating fruit the previous day, is full of seeds that have passed through the gut and are ready to germinate. So seeds surrounded by fertilizer, the dung in a light gap, are how the forest of tomorrow will grow today. And by protecting gorillas today, we are ensuring that there will be forests in the future, so that when it rains on those hills, the water doesn't just rush off, it gets soaked up by the forest, so that it generates rain. Trees put out volatile organic compounds around which water molecules coalesce to fall as rain. And through the evaporation and transpiration of trees, there's a lot of the water vapor is being put into the atmosphere. So that water cycle is at least as important as the carbon cycle. But at the moment, the only ecosystem services that apes and elephants provide to everyone on the planet that has a market value is carbon, because we're so focused on CO2 levels. So yes, we can pay them for their role in sequestering and storing CO2, but remember, we're also getting rain generation, erosion control, and the
nutrient cycling, all of it.
All those services are currently not valued. the concept of some sort of biodiversity credit or nature credit that incorporates carbon and the other services, that is paid not to the animals themselves, but to the communities that depend on those ecosystems, and if they protect them.
Yeah.
So instead of traditionally, some foreigner turns up with a briefcase full of dollars, says, that tree there, I'll give you X $100 so that I can take it away and sell it for X $1,000. And so that tree that has an economic value of 0 is converted into a part of the economy. But the tree is providing a service. If we pay for that service, you could balance that and say, actually, no, over the course of that tree's life, several hundred years, it's going to provide much more value in real cash than if you cut it down. Likewise, the elephant, you kill it and sell his front teeth, you can get some money. But if he's being paid money every day for keeping the forest healthy, and the whole world is benefiting from that, we're not going to solve the problem of climate change without the Congo forests, the Amazon forests, and the Southeast Asian rainforests. And the keystone species in those forests are the primates, the elephants, the toucans, and the tapirs, all the Ruwenzori turacos. They're all playing their role, and we don't pay for that role. The big push. Look at Rebalance.Earth.
Exactly.
Although Rebalance Earth is now focusing on UK ecosystems because that's where the financial backers feel more secure. But we're now looking for other ways of pursuing this idea of paying communities in Africa. And if it's in a national park, then the Park Service. But you can't just rely on national parks. That's usually only, 15 to 20% of a country's area. And that's like turning the life support machine down to 15 or 20% if we're going to allow the rest of it to be converted to agriculture and roads and cities. So,
well, and that's the challenge, is there's also wildlife corridors could be beneficial. So if you can, I love that. So Rebalance Earth, I think it's a wonderful idea. And I think that many of these species are engineers. They are engineers of water, of air, of nutrients, not just of carbon. And so I think that connecting that for people is a really amazing thing that you're doing there. And I think it sort of was a model of Costa Rica, right? They reforested at a really fast pace back. In 1950s, I think, or 1960s, there was, I don't know the correct percentages, but it was really low. And then fast forward 25, 30 years later, and they had reforested. And part of it was by paying farmers to keep the forest, right? Like it became more profitable to have the forest and not use it than to cut it down and run cattle through or plant whatever crops they wanted. So I think that this has a history of success, which is why obviously that you're doing it. And I think what I worry about is for a lot of people, I guess, and maybe it's too Pollyanna of me, I don't know, as I want people to connect in their heart to something and preserve it for that. But I think for the communities that are around these areas that are really sensitive, where we need these corridors, you need to be able to maintain migratory pathways. You need to be able to maintain genetic diversity, or or they become just islands that will collapse eventually because species can't move from one point to another. And now you just have a closed population that will not survive in the long term. And when we remove something so important from a forest, I think people also underestimate the domino effect that happens. They may not see gorillas as engineers in a forest. They may not see elephants as engineers of multiple systems, forest and savanna, depending on where they're found. And so I do think for the local communities that are surrounding these areas, which are in the front lines, that them making a profit economically from the preservation of the forest is absolutely imperative, especially because their livelihoods were the forests and now they don't have that. And so And if we want to keep those areas intact or help them grow and expand, that's necessary. How can people who don't live there, right? So I want people to connect from their heart. And I think that's where a lot of the appeal for these stories of Digit, or for me, my Mariah, come from. It helps people connect emotionally to individual animals, individual systems. But what can the average person who may never go to Africa, may never go to Uganda, may never go to Rwanda, may never see an elephant in the wild, may never see a gorilla in the wild, what can they do to move these goals forward in a meaningful way? Because I think people get confused. What can I do? I don't know what to do. It all sounds so bad. So what are some things that people can do to support the work that you're doing, support these communities and support these species?
A lot of the conservation work is either done or triggered by or supported by non-governmental organizations. Now, governments have the responsibility, and most governments are signed up to the Global Biodiversity Framework under the UN's Convention on Biological Diversity. The world agreed to the Paris Agreement to limit the degree of global warming to 1.5 degrees, which we're not likely to succeed in doing, but we want to keep it as close as we can to that. So our governments are saying the right thing, but at the same time, they're pushing economic growth and a better standard of living for everyone. And I wouldn't begrudge anyone wanting a better standard of living.
Of course.
We have to become more aware of what have been termed planetary boundaries or limits. Mm-hmm. And if we overstep those, then our ecosystems, and therefore the biosphere as a whole, where we live, the thin bit of breathable air and drinkable water on the planet's surface, will be damaged beyond repair. And we will suffer individually and as a species. So moderating our behavior and our consumption is probably the most valuable thing we can do. How can we do that? Being an ethical shopper, looking at the contents list. Is if the product you're buying, whether it's a laptop or a bottle of wine or a loaf of bread or whatever it is you're in the shop buying, if the company that's made it hasn't got a good environmental record and hasn't put it out there, so is it wrapped in paper that is from a plantation that is certified by the Forest Stewardship Council, FSC? If you've got the little tick tree on the side, then you can be reasonably sure. There are problems within FSC, as in any human organization, but overall, it's a better way of choosing your wood and paper products if it's from a certified source. Is that the biscuits you're buying or the shampoo you're buying, does it contain palm oil? And if it does, because oil palm is the plant that produces the most vegetable oil per unit area. You need to clear less forest to grow oil palms than if you're growing some other crop. And yet, most of where oil palms are grown in Malaysia and Indonesia has in the past few decades been converted from natural forests. So there is a roundtable on sustainable palm oil. They're trying to make deforestation-free palm oil, so new deforestation-free, the rule, not the norm and not the exception. And as a shopper, you have great power. Especially today, you can get apps that allow you to write to the CEO or to tweet or to X, whatever you call it nowadays, post on social media that you were going to buy this product made by X company, and this is their handle, but you're not, because nowhere on the label does it say the ingredients are ethically sourced and in an environmentally friendly way. I just bought a new phone. How exciting. It's a fair phone. Phone. Most of the components, the aluminium is from a certified source, so it's not from an environmentally destructive source. The workers are paid decent wages that put it together. So you can source whatever you want to buy ethically if you take a bit of effort. And that effort is what is often lacking because people don't understand. So education, this is a dual podcast for your series and mine. Mine's on Ecoflix. Ecoflix is a non-profit and it supports other non-profits. Right. So the Gorilla Organization has just become an Ecoflix partner. The Gorilla Doctors are in the process. And then if you go to Ecoflix and choose an NGO that you want to support and subscribe, 100% of your subscription goes to that organization.
Right.
So if you care about whales or wolves or elephants, or not just mammals, you care about birds. Right. We invite NGOs that haven't yet partnered with Ecoflix to join the community, because we want to build a community of people who are informed, who understand why this is so important, and are prepared to make those little adjustments to their daily lives to be part of the solution rather than carrying on being part of the problem through ignorance. Yeah. Better information, better use of I talk about the 3 Ps, the power of our purse or pocket, the political power, because even if you're too young to vote, you will be voting soon, and your elected representatives care about your opinion. How can they represent it if you haven't told them? Right. So writing to MPs or senators or congressmen and women, become an activist. And that way, and the 3rd P is your personal power. Volunteer for a charity. Even if you don't want to get to Africa, just like you did, right? Say, what can I do to help? I wrote to Dian Fossey, and I'd been given a tip as well as her PO box number saying, if you have any aptitude for fixing things, mention that, because when you live in a cabin at 10,000 feet in the forest, if something breaks, it stays broken. Yes. And I am something of a compulsive fixer. I can't help fiddling to try and make things right. So I wrote to Dian and said, well, if you want someone to mend the roof or make the tea, I'd be happy to come and help. And months later, she wrote back saying, if you can get here, we'll try. Or worse to that effect. Yeah, that's great. Yeah. Well, and so because of the Fulbright and then the work that I started a not-for-profit. So maybe I can join Ecoflix. Absolutely. Yeah. Wild Connection. So I bring this podcast to people because I get to interview people like you, and I get to talk about a lot of these issues that, and thinking about that purchasing power. I think, I agree with you. And I try to even tell that to people, like, where you have the most power, if political power takes collective action, but the most individual power you have, aside from volunteering and contributing your time or your effort in whatever skill you have that can move something forward, is in where you spend your money. Because that is the place, that's the pain point for every single corporation out there, is profit. If so that's the pain point. And whether it's corporations or profit and public reputation.
Well, right. Because public reputation is linked to profit. Yeah. Right? Yes. So for them, I believe it's all comes down to dollars. For a corporation, whether it's their public image and how that affects their bottom line.
But to some extent, that's what the law requires them to do.
I know.
They're supposed to maximize profits for their shareholders, regardless of the environmental cost, which is why I live in Stroud in Gloucestershire in England, and out of Stroud has come a number of movements, not only to the things that I'm involved with base themselves in Stroud, but there's a campaign called Stop Ecocide, which is trying to make the destruction of an ecosystem a criminal offence under the International Court of Justice, alongside genocide and crimes against humanity. And when the Rome statutes, which govern that court, were first drafted, it included ecocide. And 3 or 4 countries said that has to come out, and we're trying to put it back. So that's happening out of Stroud. And the other thing that's in Stroud, Extinction Rebellion. So Stroud is a hotbed of
I was going to say, this is fantastic.
But wherever you live in the world, you have those powers. And you can use your purchasing power and your social media power, because if you're disappointed in a company's behavior in relation to the environment, making that disappointment known in a way that they notice. And yes, some people glue themselves to the front door of their shareholders meeting. Other people send out a tweet and tag celebrities who have environmental interests, so that they then retweet, share, post, and it spreads. So people today, they I think are more connected and therefore have more power to change things, and they can use that power for trite, rubbishy things, or they can use it for really important, powerful things.
Yeah. Well, and I think like the eco side, what's interesting is we've had some lawsuits in the United States where where a community or students are suing the local government or the state government for failing to I think it was in Montana. I feel like that was one of the lawsuits where they sued the state for failing to provide the constitutional right to this healthy environment. And so I think we're seeing more and more of that, where they're using the legal system to say you are violating the Constitution that you even have for the state in terms of what you're doing to protect the environment for us. So I think that a lot of times it's knowledge, right? Where people don't know that most shrimp is aside from ecologically, kind of disastrous. It's slavery. Human slavery has not stopped at all. And it's going on in all parts of the world, and many of the products that people buy. And so getting that information out to people where they can feel they can make active choices that have an impact. And I think obviously donating to organizations is really important. And at the same time, seeing the impact of where your dollars went. So with the education project that I did with Fulbright, I have in the case studies, I have slides. Where did your money go? Like, where did each dollar go? And then over time, embed videos and photos of the projects that get done with those monies, so that there's an understanding of, you gave this money and now there's a water tank that provides clean water for this, this many families, or whatever the project is that the community decides is important for them, right? And so I think having that follow through, having that transparency, having that evidence that where you gave your money, it actually did something that you thought it was going to do, is really important, especially for smaller organizations. A lot of people have confidence in World Wildlife Fund, and they have confidence in, many of the larger organizations. But where can people, I know for sustainable fishing, there's lots of resources. Is there kind of a centralized place where people can get information on, if I buy this, I'm supporting a good company, right? Where it's not just the label, but I can go prepared. I'm not in the supermarket going, oh no, okay, I only have half an hour. I have to buy all the things I need for dinner. But where I can go ahead of time and go, oh, okay, I like this. And there's this brand that is really supporting and doing things the right way. Do you know of a place?
I think Friends of the Earth produced such a list.
Okay.
And the campaigning groups, they tend to be issue-led. So initially it tends to be all about palm oil, all about soy, or all about sustainable beef production. But it is, it would, maybe it's something we need to look at on Ecoflix, to have a shopper's guide to labeling. We did it with the Ape Alliance, because there's rainforest friendly coffee you can buy with a little frog on it. There's the FSC for timber and paper. There's the RSPO for palm oil. But when you get into the wider things, most people aren't aware of the Aluminium Stewardship Initiative, and that there's aluminium in smartphones. What?
I didn't know. I had no idea. And so, I think a lot of
case.
I think a lot of people know about coffee, even chocolate, like they're becoming more aware of fair trade chocolate. And so when it gets down
to the minerals in your smartphone, the capacitors are coated with a powder of an element called tantalum, which is a heavy metal. Tantalum, or it's heavier than lead. And that's a large part of the world's deposits are in the Eastern Democratic Republic of Congo. And mining of coltan, as the ore is called, changed the lives of many people, often for the worse, because it was like a gold rush 25 years ago. It's not that much better today. There are efforts by different bodies to regulate the flow, but basically it's, in some parts of the Eastern Congo, it's bad guys with guns controlling bits of land, terrorizing or forcing people to work and then selling the ore, and eventually it gets onto the world market. It's not a metal that's listed on the World Metals Exchange. So it's basically, you've got some, I've got some money, we can do a deal. And some of that money will go to buy guns, some will go to terrorize communities. That's something the world has to clean up. Particularly the telecommunications industries are the biggest, wealthiest companies on the planet. Get their act together and invest in sustainable production. So don't just wash your hands of the Congo. The Congo is such an important country in the world, ecologically and potentially economically. And it needs serious investment to bring the peace dividend so that the people who are currently fighting over meager resources actually have a better way of life, and the world can feel better about buying it. And the species that live in the forests above the mineral deposits can continue to play their role in stabilizing our climate and providing rainfall for the planet.
Yeah.
It's not a big ask, is it? Come on.
No, I mean, it's well, and it's, I fear that we're running out of time, when we think about
for our podcast or for
Well, I mean, I'm sure you're very busy, so we probably do need to I don't want to say goodbye. I think we could talk for hours, but I'm hoping I'll see you in Bwindi in November. And so, but I do, sort of fear that we're running out of time when it comes to climate change and how it's impacting. As you were already saying, there's less rainfall. The rains are coming later. I was there in the dry season, and I mean, the vegetation was wilted, and this was influencing how gorillas were moving and how far they were having to go, and also coming into the communities. I think really needing water, right? So yes. Bwindi gorillas drink water. I've seen them drink very often, but only usually if they kind of bump into a stream or, a little bit of running water. But in this past dry season, it was clear that they were actively seeking water because the vegetation wasn't having as much moisture as it normally would.
We used to joke about the Virungas having a rainy season and a rainier season.
Yes, exactly.
But now there is actually a dry season.
Yeah.
And streams dry up.
Yeah.
So we will continue to monitor these things and hopefully turn things around.
I hope so too.
Ecosystems and all the keystone species that keep them healthy continue to do so. And some people get lucky enough to go and see them themselves, but even if not, they can watch on Ecoflix or other natural history channels are available.
Yeah, absolutely. And thank you. Better. Thank you for all the amazing work that you've been doing for so long and that you continue to do. And a lot of the innovation that you're bringing to the conversation and the conservation of these environments and these species. It's been a real honor to have this conversation with you. So thank you.
The pleasure is mutual. And I can see we're both people who see a problem and think, we can do something about that. And that's what I think makes an activist. They don't walk away thinking, that's somebody else's problem, because climate change and having a healthy planet is all of our problems. So we're all solutionists.
Yes.
Or have to be. Thank you for inviting me onto your podcast, and thank you for coming onto my podcast.
This has been wonderful. Thanks for joining me for this powerful conversation with Ian Redmond. His passion for wildlife and unwavering commitment to conservation reminds us that protecting the natural world is not just a responsibility, it's a relationship. If you enjoyed this episode, be sure to follow Wild Connection wherever you get your podcasts and share it with someone who cares about our planet as much as you do. And don't miss our next episode where I sit down with the extraordinary Sy Montgomery, acclaimed author of The Soul of an Octopus and What the Chicken Knows. They know a lot. Like Ian, Sy's work weaves together deep empathy, powerful storytelling, and a fierce passion for the creatures who share our planet. Until then, stay curious, stay connected, and remember, the wild world is closer than you think.